Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariam Khan, and thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Barkat Charania, and Mr. President, Dr. Javed Nagari, to give me this opportunity to open up this event for you today. I'm going to begin by just sharing the vision and mission for the Forum for Dialogue and Diplomacy. Our vision is to help build stronger Pakistani-US relationship through community and civic engagement and positive dialogue. Our mission, the Forum for Dialogue and Diplomacy, is an educational group. Its mission is to engage Pakistani Americans and all other key stakeholders through a series of dialogues, discussions, meetings, and lectures. These will focus on the geostrategic, geopolitical, geoeconomics, geosocial, and geo-development needs of both Pakistan and United States of America, with the goal of promoting socio-economic development, peace, and prosperity in the region and enhancing US-Pakistan relations. I would like to invite our chairman, Dr. Barkat Charania, to come and further explain more about this organization.
Thanks, Mariam. I am here to just give a little bit of an idea as to what we are doing. We are a year old today, almost a year old. We started back in about a year back. Dr. Gari called me and told me that he wants to do this. He sent me a 2-pager, and it was really interesting, and I thought this should be done. I'm not a politician, but I'm certainly from Pakistan, and would like to have some better relationship between Pakistan and United States, which is in kind of a little bit of a turmoil and has been, you all know. Anyway, he wanted an entity formed, 501c3 made. Fortunately, we could do all within about a month. And our first meeting was in August by Sada Kambar. Second one was Stephen Bain in about October. Third one was with Mr. Abrar Hashmi, Honorable Abrar Hashmi, who is the ambassador to Nepal from Pakistan. And we have got the fourth. We have got the gentleman sitting here, and you will hear him. And you have heard the mission and the vision already by Mariam. And here is the person who will tell us where are we going and what are we doing, and a number of other things that he really is an expert in. Let's hear him. Thank you. And Maria will probably explain further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charania. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Kamran Asghar to introduce our esteemed guest today.
Thank you. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Kamran Azhar Ali. I teach anthropology at the University of Texas, Austin. And it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce my colleague and friend from the University of Texas, Jason Brownlee. Jason completed his PhD in the early 2000s from Princeton University in politics, and since 2005 has been teaching at the University of Texas. He's professor in the Department of Government, which is euphemistically what we call political science, but we have our government department. An eminent scholar of the Middle East, and now hopefully South Asia. And he's author of 3 very well-received books, Age of Democratization from Cambridge University, Authoritarianism and the Age of, Authoritarianism in an Age of Democratization from Cambridge University Press in 2007, Democracy Prevention, The Politics of US-Egyptian Alliance, again from Cambridge University in 2012, and with other colleagues, The Arab Spring Pathways of Repression and Reform from Oxford University Press. He's published widely in some of the most prestigious journals in political science and in social sciences and politics and in comparative political science journals. He, of course, teaches regularly at university in his department, has a number of PhD scholars whom he has trained, and he is currently working on a fourth book, which will set America's longest and costliest war since Vietnam, the Afghanistan War and the war in Iraq, in a broader comparative and historical framework. I think today's talk would be part of that discussion. So I thought all of us thought that it would be interesting to have someone like Professor Brownlee come and speak to this forum, who is not only an eminent political scientist, social scientist, academic scholar, but who has a very deep and engaged and ongoing interest in American foreign policy, especially in the global south and specifically in the Middle East, and now, like I said, in South Asia. So again, it's a real honor that we could have Jason here. Please join me in welcoming Jason Brownlee.
All right, well, it's great to be with you all today, and I want to thank Dr. Charanian and Dr. Lagari and my great colleague, Kamran Ali, for the invitation and for joining you. And if this is being recorded, let me know if the audio levels are good.
Can you bring the microphone closer to your, because we are also recording, we want to make sure it gets recorded so that you can't visit Pakistan in the future.
Exactly, right. And this is the recording microphone?
I asked him whether he wants to be recorded. He said he's fine.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with it.
He's a risk taker.
I'm an open book. I'm not a politician, not an office holder of any kind, and I'd like to be transparent about the arguments that I'm making. So I'm going to talk today about the American war in Afghanistan. And we'll see how things go in terms of time. I've got to kind of think about what parts to cover and what to skip over. But if I skip anything really important, we can come back to that in the question and answer. As you are all probably aware, the post 9/11 wars that have waged from Southwest Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa have carried a heavy price tag for the country, for the United States. According to the Cost of War Project at Brown University, the United States through fiscal year 2022 spent $2.3 trillion on its wars in Afghanistan and Pakistan, $2.1 trillion on the wars in Syria and Iraq, and another $355 billion on operations in other countries. From October 2001 through September 21, direct war deaths among U.S. service members in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other areas of the war on terror totaled 7,052. And that doesn't include private contractors. There are several thousand Americans who were serving in those wars, including in combat, as private contractors who also lost their lives. But there are also the effects at the other end of U.S. foreign policy, the lives lost and disrupted among the tens of millions of people in the Muslim-majority countries targeted for U.S. intervention since 9/11. And I think, if we're trying to draw lessons from the past 20 years, we got to think about the trillions of dollars that Americans have spent, the thousands of Americans who have lost their lives. But I think it's also very important to consider the effects at the other end, the losses at the other end. And there's a common pattern. Intervention brings profound instability. Even if greater instability is not the conscious intent of U.S. national security officials, it is a predictable byproduct of American attempts to reshape local politics. When the White House, the Pentagon, and the CIA attempt to suppress existing local authority figures and replace them with elites that the U.S. government prefers, that's definitely a story of what happened in Afghanistan, the groups that stand to lose fight to defend the system that they've been running, and what starts as a bid for political restoration soon acquires the aura of a liberation struggle. The more the elites of the pre-intervention order face American and other foreign military forces, the more their nationalist credentials and popular appeal grow. And that was the story that played out in Afghanistan between fall 2001 and summer 2021. Now, was there another path, a radically different path? And I would say that for my talk today, that is kind of the foil or the counter argument. And I'm going to argue not really, that there really wasn't another path. levels of post-intervention stability do not, as much as conventional wisdom asserts, they do not depend upon a protracted investment of forces into nation building, counterinsurgency, and air wars. Rather, the difference between an enduring settlement and renewed fighting hinges on whether the United States is ready to guarantee the safety, influence, and livelihood of the enemy elites it had just defeated on the battlefield. And I'm not going to get much further into that alternative in the talk, but I'll just say what I'm gesturing to here is the post-World War II cases of Germany and Japan. I'd be glad to come back to that in question and answer. But in 1945, the US approach to Emperor Hirohito in Japan, to ex-Nazis in Germany, was the exact opposite of how the US approached the Taliban in December of 2001. It was a complete difference between reconciliation and inclusion in those post-World War II cases and utter exclusion and a completely punitive policy in fall and winter of 2001. So where such an accommodation, where that kind of post-World War II accommodation has been absent, the predictable result has been a resumption of fighting, and more often than not, America's eventual defeat and retreat. So in the remainder of my talk, I'm going to discuss the, well, I guess I would say, in the remainder of my talk, my basic thesis is that a restoration of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was all but inevitable given the United States hardline anti-Taliban stance in December of 2001. And there's a tremendous irony here, if irony is still alive, it's not completely dead. There's a tremendous irony here because a more flexible and inclusive approach to the Taliban in fall and winter 2001, when the Taliban were in disarray, when they were kind of on the back foot, a more inclusive approach at that point could have, or I guess I would say probably had the best chance of delivering the kind of broad coalition government that American leaders were desperate to achieve 10 and 20 years later. Now, before getting into the Afghanistan history, and I've titled the talk From Coercion to Compromise, because there's really an arc here where the US starts off with very repressive policies toward the Taliban, and then after nearly a decade of fighting, starts to be more flexible, starts to reach out to the Taliban, realizes that military force does not translate into political authority, and then eventually ends up in the compromise of 2020, the deal that was signed in Doha on February of 29th of 2020. But before getting into Afghanistan, it's important, I think, to zoom out and consider the bigger picture. Because if people ask, why are we in Afghanistan? The conventional answer, the common answer is, well, it's because of 9/11. It's because of terrorism. And we can debate whether that was a persuasive answer in fall of 2001 or maybe spring 2002 when there were still some Al-Qaeda forces fighting in Afghanistan. But in subsequent years, I think that answer does not withstand scrutiny. And so I want to talk a little bit about the terrorism threat as it's understood, which I think is wildly overblown. So as I tell my students at UT, when it comes to the question of foreigners attacking them, the United States has historically been and remains one of the safest countries in the world. Anti-American terrorism has been blown wildly out of proportion. In the years since the United States embarked on the war on terror, incidents of terrorism and terrorist organizations have proliferated. They have spread. They've grown in number. The dangers of this trend, though, have been concentrated in a small number of Muslim countries in Southwest Asia and Africa. Meanwhile, people in America and nearly all other countries around the world have been practically free of the threat of terrorism. As one study from the Cato Institute reported, Islamist-inspired terrorists, so basically Muslim militants, took the lives of less than 0.1% of American murder victims during 2001 to 2015. Americans who are not terrorists carry out nearly all murders in America. And it's not just Americans. Maybe people say, oh, well, we have the Patriot Act and we have this massive security state. No, it's not just Americans who have been safe. the political scientists John Mueller and Mark Stewart report as follows: the lack of success of Al-Qaeda terrorists in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and other Western countries mirrors that in the United States. The number of people killed by Islamist extremist terrorists in the UK is less than 4 per year, while for Canada and Australia it is 2 in the last decade. The 9/11 attacks by Al-Qaeda proved to be a spectacular aberration, not a harbinger, and global security was hardly challenged. So this trend is worldwide, it's international. Terrorist attacks outside of the 7 central states that have been the focus of the global war on terrorism have actually slightly declined. Now those 7 states where there is so much violence are Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And so and I'm turning to those states now, while Americans have enjoyed historic levels of safety from foreign attack, the people at the other end of the war on terror have experienced historic levels of risk from non-state militants, terrorists, from their own government forces, and from Pentagon and CIA operations. Data comparing the 14 years after 2001 to the 14 years before 2001 show that the number of annual terrorist attacks in the 7 central states of the war on terror has risen by a factor of 20. So from 24 annually to 481 annually on average. And those same countries account for why, since 9/11, the State Department's own count of foreign terrorist organizations has doubled from 29 to 58, with a historically high share, over 75% of these groups being Muslim militant organizations. It's the State Department's list and the instability in other countries that presidents are relying on when they make chilling claims about the continuing threat of foreign terrorism to Americans. In March 2009, President Obama said that, quote, "For the American people, the border region of the Pakistani frontier has become the most dangerous place in the world." 8.5 years later, President Trump reported, quote, "Today, 20 US designated foreign terrorist organizations are active in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the highest concentration in any region anywhere in the world." But it's inaccurate to suggest, as Obama and Trump did, that more foreign terrorist organizations, as classified by the State Department, means more animus directed at the United States, or that it means a higher likelihood of mass casualty attacks against Americans. In fact, even as the number of officially identified terrorist organizations rose, the rate of terrorist attacks outside US war zones fell. The data tell us that the problem of national security when it comes to terrorism is nearly the opposite of what Americans are commonly told. The impression is that Americans are uniquely imperiled by attackers from overseas. The reality is that they are extraordinarily safe from attackers from overseas. The impression is that the countries overseas in the heart of the Muslim world are radiating out violence. The reality is that they are engulfed by internal violence, shootings and bombings related to terrorism and related to the wars that are supposed to be reducing terrorism. A conservative estimate of the local death toll from post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria is 773,000, nearly half of which are unarmed, non-belligerent casualties, civilian casualties. The specific numbers for Pakistan, as many of you are aware, are roughly 66,000, including 24,000 civilians. So it's common to hear about Afghanistan costing Americans trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. That's one sliver of a much larger toll. At the business end of America's post-9/11 policies, in the heart of the Muslim world, we've seen people experiencing tremendous amounts of non-state violence and state violence, with hundreds of thousands killed and much larger numbers wounded and displaced. Again, though, it's inaccurate. In fact, it's basically a circular argument to claim that the instability over in Pakistan, and in sort of Western Pakistan and Afghanistan, is a threat to Americans at home and a reason for occupying Afghanistan for 2 decades. Now, to get to the arc from coercion to compromise, and get to Afghanistan in particular, now that I've set that larger picture out for you, and basically to just help us think about, like, why was the U.S. in Afghanistan, or at least to the extent that people thought, well, we should stay in Afghanistan because of terrorism. That threat was really never there. So, Afghanistan, the invasion, fall 2001. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because the war was initially quite successful in its initial aims. It began as primarily an air campaign with some ground forces largely supporting the Northern Alliance. It was in fall 2001, and there was a military strategy that defeated the Taliban and pushed them out of their strongholds and established the basis for a new non-Taliban government. This strategy, though, which brought military success, was then followed by a political strategy to completely block out the Taliban from any negotiations about what the next government would look like. And here's where the path of Afghanistan radically departed from what we saw in Germany and Japan and some of the other successful cases that presidents and their advisors would like to cite as role models. The December 2001 Bonn conference that drafted Afghanistan's new political system excluded the Taliban representatives completely, even as this decision contravened the lessons of post-World War II Reconstruction. It was treated at the time as commonsensical. U.S. envoy James Dobbins recalled, quote, "The Taliban had been so discredited by their performance in government and by the speed at which they had been displaced that they were not going to be a significant factor in Afghan politics." That's what people thought. He noted, this is in an interview with Washington Post journalist Steve Paul, he later noted that assumption, quote, "turned out to be completely wrong." The Taliban would obviously remain a highly significant factor because their prudential military retreat belied lasting authority across much of Afghan society, particularly in southern provinces. And I guess what I would say here, and again, we could come back to this in discussion, is you might ask, well, what was the Taliban offering, or what was their position in December 2001? There were overtures through an intermediary, a representative from Mullah Muhammad Omar, for the Taliban to participate in governance in some way. For example, having control over 3 provinces in the south, basically the Taliban's heartland. There's going to be Kandahar, Zabul, and Helmand province. If they could get those 3 provinces, and Mullah Omar could be allowed to just live out his life in Kandahar, basically get amnesty and just live out his life. That was a possible deal that Hamid Karzai was working on with a representative from Mullah Omar and the Bush administration. I think specifically Donald Rumsfeld, who it came to, just completely nixed that idea. So there were opportunities, even after the war, even after the Taliban had been defeated. Opportunities which were basically like, okay, you beat us, we've lost the war, now, okay, let's let life continue in Afghanistan and let us, like, at least, have some existence in some part of Afghanistan. And that was vetoed. So, ordinary Afghans in the countryside for several years were basically then living under the rule of the local warlords that had been in charge before the Taliban had come to power in 94 and 96. Meanwhile, the Taliban quietly regrouped and rebuilt its political base, allowing a counteroffensive that could, once it really got going, could only be held back sort of sporadically and momentarily by concentrated NATO and international and American efforts to hold areas. So I'm going to move forward to the Obama years, because that's where we really start having this shift from more of a repressive strategy to a more accommodating political and diplomatic strategy. We can come back to the Bush years if we'd like in discussion. But if you look at Obama and then going forward through Trump and Biden, what's interesting, I know the tendency is to think, okay, different presidents, different parties, very different temperaments. If you contrast like Obama and Trump, I don't know if they're ever, in personality-wise, too more contrasting examples of people who have occupied the Oval Office. But in terms of the foreign policy toward Afghanistan, there's a tremendous amount of continuity among these three men, among these three presidents. At least especially continuity, I would say, from Obama's, like, as of 2011 or so forward, from 2011 through 2021, a lot of continuity between Obama, Trump, and Biden. And the continuity was that the US pivoted from trying to defeat the Taliban through force with the Afghanistan troop surge of 2010, 2011, to accepting the reality of the Taliban's fighting ability and political power. In this same stretch of time, Obama, Trump, and Biden were coming to grips with the corruption and weakness of the official Afghan government. Critics of the course that all three men charted said, and some of them continue to say, that the United States should have sustained a higher troop presence in Afghanistan beyond 2010, beyond the initial surge. And the president should have kept fighting the Taliban until the group was severely disrupted and could be incorporated into the official Afghan government from a position of weakness. My interpretation of the history would be that that pathway, the path of continued confrontation and a delay in political compromise, would have resulted in a much larger death toll for U.S. forces, and that was a price that Democratic and Republican commanders-in-chief, as well as the American public, were not willing to pay. So in 2010, Obama and his advisors start thinking, well, actually, let me back up. In 2009, I'm not going to say much about the surge, because okay, but there's a couple things that are important about it. So in 2009, Obama announces the troop surge. He says, the problem in Afghanistan is George W. Bush took his eye off the ball. He sunk so many troops into Iraq because that wasn't really the threat. I mean, you're all probably familiar with this narrative. And so now we need to refocus on Afghanistan because that's where the 9/11 hijackers were, that's where their leaders were based, and that should be the focus. And so now we need to put more troops into Afghanistan, and he pledges a commitment that eventually gets the US presence up to around 98,000. Adding NATO troops, it comes to roughly like 130,000. And that leads to the most intense fighting of the war. Over half of American casualties that happened in Afghanistan during the 20-year occupation happened during Obama's first term. So most Americans who died fighting in Afghanistan in this war died during Obama's first term as a result of that decision to escalate. Okay, so they do commit to an escalation in 2009, but in 2010, Obama and his advisors start thinking they need to reach out to the Taliban and start trying to find some type of path toward a peace settlement, a way of ending the war. And ideally, that settlement would involve bringing the Taliban into the existing Afghan national government. Basically, what was not done in December of 2001, back at the Bonn conference. And so, okay, Taliban, we're going to bring you into the government somehow, and then in exchange, you're going to stop fighting. Now, not everyone in the administration agreed with this idea. David Petraeus, who ended up being in charge of the International Security and Assistance Force, ISAF, in Afghanistan, was probably the most vocal critic. He wanted Obama to keep the additional surge forces in Afghanistan beyond the original timeline. And his argument was that the US should negotiate from a position of strength, and that it never had gotten to that position of strength. So you got to keep fighting until you get to that position of strength, where you have your ideal negotiating position. So from his point of view, reaching out to the Taliban in 2010, especially when Obama has told the Taliban that US forces will start leaving in 2011 and 2012, because as soon as, when he announced the surge in December of 2009, he also said they're going to start coming home. So there's going to be basically, the US will be on a glide path toward getting out of Afghanistan by the time Obama heads into re-election in 2012. So he said that's a bad move. You're not negotiating from a position of strength. You're negotiating while you're walking out the door. And it's an argument I expect we'll continue to hear for years. The US compromised with the Taliban too soon. The US should have stayed in Afghanistan longer. Could have defeated the Taliban, or at least weakened them so much they would not be able to take over the entire country. So what are the problems with this? Well, there are a couple of issues. What if the Taliban are not defeatable through military force? What if putting more American troops just means more American casualties without actually improving America's negotiating position? You get more Taliban casualties, you get an increase in other Afghan casualties as well, but basically you would get more American casualties and that wouldn't actually buy you more political influence. Petraeus envisioned a scenario, a counterfactual, that America could sort of scale up and translate its displacement of the Taliban in a few areas into something that would be a national success. But that was a scenario that 10 years of fighting had not delivered, and I don't think another 10 years with 98,000 troops would have delivered it either. And this is actually also a criticism I heard of Obama when I was I've been to Pakistan once. I went to Pakistan last October, and spoke with a number of office holders and journalists and political analysts in Islamabad, a few people in Lahore as well. And this was definitely an explanation that I heard for why the Taliban was able to come back to power. Was Obama announced that this troop surge would end, and so that all the Taliban had to do was bide their time. And so whether it's Petraeus or whether it's the analysts over in Pakistan, that's only partly accurate. I mean, first, the Taliban could have bided their time regardless of whether or not Obama explicitly put an end date on the surge in the initial announcement. Because if you think about it, okay, who lives in Afghanistan? Okay, Afghans. Foreigners, whether they're Russians, whether they're Americans, or any other non-Afghans, are eventually going to leave. So they're eventually going to go back to their homes. So there's always an expiration date, whether or not the president explicitly states it. But also, and this is most interesting and most crucial, the Taliban didn't believe Obama's timeline anyway. So they were not fighting in a way that was like, okay, we're just going to wait till 2011 and then resume the war. No, they were fighting hard and intensely in 2010 at the height of the surge. And that's why you ended up with so many US casualties, actually. So the surge years, they do count. You can't just write those off. They do help to provide an answer to the question of how much America can translate supremacy on specific battlefields into political authority over broader territory. And the answer is not so much. More important than what I think, though, is what Obama and Trump and Biden thought. None of them believed that escalation would be a smart move for the United States, at least not after 2010, 2011. And so we get the path of diplomacy and eventual compromise. Let's see, anything else about 2010? 2011 is, yeah. I'm going to try to fast forward a little bit. A few things that are really important about 2011. So the year 2011 may go down for historians as just like one of those really big years in world history. Like 1968, 1989. In 2011 we had the Arab Spring over in the Middle East and North Africa, and then of course we had some very pivotal events in Pakistan regarding the relationship between Washington and Islamabad. And of course, the key event in May of that year was the killing of Osama bin Laden. May 1st, U.S. Special Forces raided bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. They shoot and kill him. And this fits within Obama's argument that the U.S. did not need to continue waging a conventional war in Afghanistan and Pakistan in order to protect the American people. So to the extent that Americans are living with this really hyped up, overblown fear of terrorism, the bin Laden raid can sort of allay those fears, at least, and show them, like, okay, we did this with SEAL Team 6 instead of with the 81st Airborne in some major ground war. And in June of 2011, Obama sticks with his plan to pull troops out of Afghanistan. He's able to follow through on the drawdown of troops, and so that ball is rolling. And the drawdown is not what David Petraeus wanted, but it was what Americans wanted. In 2009 and 2011, pollsters were asking, are you worried that withdrawing from Afghanistan would risk terrorist attacks on the United States? And the percent that were not worried rose from 43% in 2009 to 55% in June 2011. So a slight majority, and that's right after bin Laden has been killed. And by this point, you've got Obama starting to run for re-election. He starts saying on the campaign trail, it's time to focus on nation building at home. He doesn't want to be vulnerable to criticisms that he's mismanaged the Afghanistan war or that foreign policy has taken priority over domestic policy. And certainly the foreign policy element of the Obama administration when it came to Pakistan was not going well in 2011. Relations with the head of the Pakistani military at that time, General Ashfaq Kayani, were very frosty. And then that fall, November 26th, we get the Salalah incident. U.S. forces based in Afghanistan fly over in helicopters and mistakenly come over the border into Pakistan. They get shot at by Pakistani forces. The Americans return fire, and they end up killing 28 Pakistani soldiers. Now, these kinds of incidents between nations are, they do happen, even among friends, even among allies. Think about, like, Russia and Turkey over in the skies of Syria at one point. But generally speaking, they can get wrapped up pretty quickly with an appropriate apology. It takes 7 months after the Salalah incident for the State Department to issue its apology, during which time the Pakistani government has shown that it has considerable leverage over U.S. operations in Afghanistan by shutting down some of the traffic from Pakistan going into Afghanistan of military transport. So for the rest of I'm going to move toward Trump, and I guess here's how I would bridge it: the Obama years to the Trump years. I mean, for the rest of Obama's time in office, there's an interest in reaching out to the Taliban, and once he gets reelected, I think diplomatically or domestically, I would say Obama has a stronger hand to play in terms of doing something bold diplomatically. But then there are problems at the other end of the relationship, specifically in Kabul with the government of Afghanistan, led by Hamid Karzai, who was wrapping up his second term, and then also the leadership change that happens within the Taliban. The position of the Taliban, while Mullah Omar was still alive, was that they were willing to talk with the Americans, but they were unwilling to talk with the government of Hamid Karzai. They considered Karzai a puppet of Washington, and they basically maintained this position right up through the takeover of the country in 2021. They wouldn't talk with the Afghan government until the United States was out. And because the Afghan government was barely able to defend itself without being backed up by the American military, that meant that the Taliban, in practice, would never really need to negotiate seriously with the Afghan government. So the strategy of the Taliban leadership was to deal with the United States as a foreign occupying power and say, okay, you're an occupier, I will continue to attack you as long as you're in my country. I will stop attacking you if you leave the country. At the same time, I'm not going to talk with this Afghan government, which is an extension of your foreign occupation. So Karzai, so Obama gets reelected, and now we're into 2013. Karzai, as many of you know, did not get along well with Barack Obama or with Joe Biden. He didn't like the way that the Taliban refused to talk with his government in any serious manner, and Karzai didn't get along well with the government of Pakistan. And here's an anecdote that encapsulates these relationships. Back in 2009, Vice President Joe Biden was in a conversation with Karzai. I think they were in Kabul, like at a dinner. And Karzai was asking Biden to work harder to stop Pakistan from supporting the Taliban. And Biden, in a classic moment of Joe Biden candor, said, "Mr. President, Pakistan is 50 times more important to the United States than Afghanistan." So that's Biden to Karzai. And Obama and his people complained about Karzai. They said that they said basically Obama gave up on making much progress with Karzai while he was president, and so started looking beyond Karzai. Okay, maybe the next guy will be more cooperative with us. Now, while the United States was looking ahead to Karzai's successor, the top figures in the Taliban, based in Quetta, were struggling with leadership change. In April of 2013, Mullah Muhammad Omar, who had been the main founder of the Taliban and its military and spiritual commander since 1994, died in the hospital of tuberculosis. The Shura Council then needed to decide upon a new emir. They did eventually pick Mullah Akhtar Mansour, and but this whole leadership change and the debate that was happening within the Taliban really weakened their ability to put forward a kind of a unified message. And in fact, the question of outreach to the Americans became a cleavage within the group while they're going through this leadership change. You do get a new president of Afghanistan in 2014, Ashraf Ghani, who wins the election with 55% of the vote in a runoff and 45% for his closest rival, Abdullah. But this was a very controversial election. There was serious reports of widespread fraud, and Abdullah and many of his supporters refused to recognize the result. So this controversy raised the possibility of a deadlocked government or some type of major political schism among the non-Taliban part of Afghanistan's population. Eventually, Secretary of State John Kerry brokers a deal between the two sides. Ghani would be president, and Abdullah would serve in the government in a new position called chief executive. And as we get to these final years of the Obama administration, the Obama and Biden are really basically coming to grips with just how little progress they've made after all of the sacrifices that U.S. service members have made, and just how maybe the best thing they can do is get some type of respectable withdrawal at some point. According to reporting in the New York Times in 2015, Obama told his national security team, "We're no longer in nation-building mode," and what he meant by that was that no one in the Situation Room that day thought that the United States, after 14 years of war, billions of dollars spent, and more than 2,000 American lives lost, would ever transform Afghanistan into a democracy able to defend itself. And at the same time, however, Obama said to the group, quote, "The counterterrorism challenges are real." Obama didn't want to walk away and allow Afghanistan to become a seabed for extremists again. And sure enough, he ends up halting the withdrawal. There will still be troops in Afghanistan when he leaves office and Trump comes in. Now, it just so happens, we have another nice Joe Biden anecdote from his time as vice president. He was in the Situation Room in that meeting, and according to the same New York Times journalist, Biden thought Afghanistan was going to be engulfed in chaos no matter how long American forces stayed there or how soon they left. Quote, it doesn't matter if we leave tomorrow or 10 years from now, he declared, according to those in the room. He conceded a broken record on this issue. So, and of course, Biden, think about Biden, like not just vice president, but Senator Biden. I mean, he's been in Washington since, I guess the overthrow of the monarchy in Afghanistan. So, I mean, he's really got quite a long perspective on the ups and downs of that country. In Obama's last year in office, a significant event for the Taliban, there's a drone strike that kills Mullah Akhtar Mansour, the successor to Mullah Omar. That was May 21st, 2016. Notably, he's killed by a drone that is not operating in the Fatah. So the Fatah was the area where Washington and Islamabad sort of agreed we can have drone strikes here, sort of on the down low. But this drone strike actually happens in Baluchistan after Mansour comes back over from a visit to Iran. But obviously that's not a good step forward for U.S. Taliban talks, for the U.S. to drone strike, basically to assassinate the leader of the Taliban. 4 days after the strike, the Quetta Shura selects a new emir, Mulavi Hibatullah Akhundzada, who is still the emir of the Taliban to this day. Akhundzada was said to be more liked within the Taliban, more liked than his predecessor, and he proved to be a tougher negotiator, actually, than the man the Americans had just eliminated. So let's get to those negotiations and sort of the end game in Afghanistan. So, when Donald Trump was running for the White House, he presented himself as the antithesis of Obama, and not just on the campaign trail, but earlier years he had tweeted about, like, why are we wasting all this money in Afghanistan? It's time to get out of Afghanistan. And yet once he gets into the White House, he followed a path that was notably similar to Obama. He flirted with military escalation, potentially kind of taking a more hard line approach toward the Taliban, and then he became more flexible. And just like Obama, and basically what Obama and then Trump and then Biden were trying to do is get the Taliban to enable a somewhat orderly American withdrawal from Afghanistan. So get them to not be attacking U.S. forces and ideally participate in some type of coalition government that'll put a positive face on what America leaves behind. And so initially, Trump was deferring to hawkish voices on his national security team, and I remember watching, it was August 2017, when Trump gives this speech that's just, it's one of those, like sometimes he's very energetic and off the cuff and he seems to be like natural and authentic. And there are other times where he's just kind of like reading the teleprompter and more robotic and mechanical. This was one of the more like mechanical, like he didn't seem enthusiastic about what he was saying. And it was very kind of standard foreign policy establishment kind of talk. He said, I'm here tonight to lay out our path forward in Afghanistan and South Asia. My original instinct was to pull out, and historically I like following my instincts, but all my life I've heard that decisions are much different when you sit behind the desk in the Oval Office. In other words, when you're President of the United States. So I studied Afghanistan in great detail and from every conceivable angle, and I arrived at three fundamental conclusions about America's core interest in Afghanistan. First, our nation must seek an honorable and enduring outcome worthy of the tremendous sacrifices that have been made. Second, the consequences of a rapid exit are both predictable and unacceptable. 9/11, the worst attack in our history, was planned and directed from Afghanistan because that country was ruled by a government that gave comfort and shelter to terrorists. A hasty withdrawal would create a vacuum that terrorists, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, would instantly fill. Third and finally, the security threats we face in Afghanistan and the broader region are immense. Today, 20 U.S.-designated foreign terrorist organizations are active in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the highest concentration in any region anywhere in the world. So it's kind of speech that you could imagine just like any mainstream politician in Washington delivering. It could be Hillary Clinton, it could be Obama, John Kerry, it could be Republican or Democrat. It's like, withdrawal would create a vacuum. There's so many terrorist organizations over there. Just kind of the standard national security cliches. And as I said earlier, when Trump's speechwriters mentioned 20 terrorist groups in Afghanistan and Pakistan, they are talking about groups that mostly did not exist at the start of the war on terror, did not exist on 9/11. These are groups like the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, that arose amid the instability of Operation Enduring Freedom. Now, that speech, for people who wanted to end the endless wars and wanted Trump to abide by his campaign rhetoric, suggested an 180-degree turn. We thought we elected somebody totally different than Hillary Clinton. That sounds a lot like what Hillary Clinton would be doing in Afghanistan, like just sticking around. But privately, there were low-level talks going on, and Trump was interested in some type of agreement. According to historian Carter Malkasian, quote, rumors spread of angry outbursts in the West Wing in which Trump shouted, "Where is my deal? Why do I not have a deal yet?" So he was really pushing people in his administration to get some type of deal with the Taliban. Even as publicly, he was kind of saying what the Pentagon wanted him to say. In March 2018, Trump gave the Pentagon, the Defense Department, a deadline for military operations. He told Secretary of Defense Mattis, you've got to turn this war in Afghanistan around by August, 5 months later. It's a pretty quick timeline, or I'll just pull out anyway. And here's another excellent quote from Malkasian's book, America's War in Afghanistan. For Trump, Afghanistan would always be a fool's errand. The cost of the war was an especially sore point. $27 billion per year in military spending, far less than the $110 billion of 2011, but still substantial. Over 2017 and 2018, he informed a businessman that he wanted out of the Middle East and Afghanistan, that the United States should never have gone in. Confidants passed word that Trump would sooner withdraw unilaterally than go into the 2020 election with the Afghan war. And so there again, we have, just like Obama announcing the surge early on, but then also announcing basically the start of a withdrawal as he looked forward to 2012, Trump's politics in 2017, 2018 are informed by looking ahead to 2020. And it's on February 29th, 2020, just in the very early days of the pandemic, that we finally get a U.S. Taliban deal. And this is brokered by Zalmay Khalilzad, an Afghan American who was Trump's emissary. And I'll just cover a couple of highlights. The deal was called the Agreement for Bringing Peace to Afghanistan, and signed between the United States and the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and it says in the document, which the U.S. will refer to as the Taliban because we do not recognize the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And the U.S. wanted four things. It basically got two of them. It wanted an end to violence, so an end to Taliban attacks on U.S. forces. It wanted an Afghan political settlement, some type of deal between the Taliban and the other, the Ashraf Ghani government, basically. Number three was Taliban renunciation of Al-Qaeda. And number four was long-term presence of U.S. intelligence assets and special operations forces in Afghanistan for counterterrorism operations. So they didn't get the Afghan political settlement, and the Americans did not get the agreement to allow intelligence assets and special operations forces in Afghanistan. But the outcome was that the Taliban would agree to stop attacking U.S. forces and would agree not to allow groups to use Afghan soil for attacks on the United States, so basically 2 out of 4. And yeah, we can get into whether the fact that Ayman Zawahiri was in Kabul in summer of 2022, or yeah, in 2022 when he was killed by a U.S. drone strike, was a violation of the agreement or not. There's a couple of different perspectives on that. So I guess, yeah, I'd be glad to go into 2020 as well, but you all have been very patient and attentive, so I'd like to move into discussion. Since the later events under Biden are of more kind of recent memory, I mean, it was chaotic. The Afghan forces, collapsed like a house of cards. The U.S. withdrew. The Taliban retook Kabul on August 15th. U.S. forces were out of the city by the end of the month, shortly ahead of Biden's withdrawal date of September 11th of 2021. And I would just close by saying that it was a fine deal that the United States reached on February 29th of 2020, that Trump reached and then that Biden carried out. But the United States did not get more than what the Taliban under Mullah Omar was offering or willing to consider conceding back in 2010 during the Obama administration. And the additional years of fighting and foot dragging by the White House did not amount to a better deal. In fact, if we go back to the months immediately after September 11th, the Taliban were at their weakest in November or December of 2001, and some portion of the group could have accepted a power sharing deal where you would have had the kind of the Northern Alliance parties like Abdullah's group and the other kind of major non-Pashtun militias and warlords really included, had this possibility of allowing the Taliban some kind of autonomy or regional control in southern Afghanistan actually been seriously considered. So we're gonna, basically, when you have these major interventions and they start off the way they did in Afghanistan, you're gonna get an arc from coercion to compromise. It's just really a question of how short that arc is gonna be and how heavy the costs that the occupying country will be paying over in the interim between those 2 points. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brownlee. That was, look at the audience over here. I think you've definitely captivated their attention. Not a single word. I thought myself it was just very interesting, and thank you so much for your insights on the U.S. operations in Afghanistan in relationship with Pakistan. It was very interesting, but not surprising on how different U.S. presidents during their different terms think differently when it comes around foreign policy, right? So thank you so much for that. I am going to now invite Dr. Javed Laghari to come here and say a few words, and then we're going to go into Q&A.
And do you want me to return to a seat? Yes, okay.
But Jason, get a mic with you, I think.
Yeah, we have one mic with him and we have one mic.
I have one mic here
And on the floor.
Yes, can hear you.
Well, on behalf of the forum, thank you all for joining us on this rainy Saturday afternoon, I should say. And we are very thankful, of course, to Jason here for driving up all the way from Austin, and to Mr. Kamran Asdar also sitting in the right here for kind of convincing you to come and talk to this Pakistani American crowd. You know, for us, Afghanistan, of course, is a big area of interest, and so is it for the Americans, because a lot of geopolitical developments that take place in, I would say, South Asia and in West Asia are all related to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and basically India, what happens out there. So thank you for throwing that insight, at least till the American withdrawal. I would say we are also, of course, interested, which I believe will be a part of the question answer, at what happens after the Americans have gone, because I think that is a regime that is also of interest to us. So you may not have researched on that, but definitely we would like to hear your views at this point. So I will now kind of hand over to the floor here for people to ask questions from Dr. Jason Brownlee. Yes, Kamran, you want to say something?
I'm taking this opportunity just to thank you so much, Jason. That was wonderful and really informative. I just wanted to, it's not a question, but it's a comment to help us. So, what was the military like? I mean, that kind of historical memory of Vietnam had also gone away. So I was just wondering if you could, I mean, you've said all this, I just wanted you to expand that, whether there is also a way in which, quote unquote, a cultural argument around not negotiating with Iran and the kind of historical memory within Pentagon or the Defense Department or the American state of what did not work in Vietnam was the escalation, because one could say that NDA could sit it out, or it was their country, they knew the formula, like what you were saying.
I would say it's almost like the more terrible the defeated enemy was, and the more damage it inflicted on the United States, the more respect it got in the post-war settlement. As if, like, well, if, you know, the weaker the adversary, the more you can really try to kick them while they're down, and so then you do get more of a repeat of a Vietnam kind of situation where you think, well, militarily, this is no contest. The asymmetry in conventional armed forces is so vast, there's just no way we're going to lose. And I think what happens, why maybe they didn't take the lessons from Vietnam, and I'll have to say this is something it took a little while for me to sink in, is when you look back at Vietnam and you think about communists and you think about sort of third world or global south liberation movements, I mean, one of the great political scientists that has helped my thinking on this is the Pakistani author Iqbal Ahmed. And, and he says, counterinsurgency is counter-revolution, because this is a revolutionary force. It's hard to think about the Taliban, and like in terms of phases of history or philosophy as being a revolutionary force. It's like taking the country forward, and they could really capture majority support, or at least plurality support. So I think there was this mentality of, okay, yeah, they had their shot, but once they're gone, Afghans will never want to go back to the Taliban. And yet, what happened is, Afghans, city after city, village after village, and not just in Pashtun areas, gradually found, okay, their fundamental material needs in terms of physical safety, employment, especially physical safety though, look better off if in some post-American, post-occupation scenario than any type of continuation of the American occupation. Not to mention also just how corrupt and repressive and arbitrary and capricious the Afghan government and Afghan police under Karzai and Ghani could be. I did, when I was in Islamabad, speak with a couple of Afghan refugees who just, one of whom was from Helmand province, and just really described how atrocious the police were during the years of the U.S. and international occupation. So I think that's at least, I think for a lot of us, we could think, okay, yeah, Vietnam, communism, there's like a universal sort of ideology there. There's a political project that you could see beating out, ZM and sort of, but when it comes to Afghanistan, it was harder to recognize that the Taliban's ideology, as especially with some of the practices that they were infamous for in the late 90s, would be able to kind of ride a historical tide in the same way.
A catastrophe takes years in making, it doesn't happen. So we are not recognizing that the intervention in Afghanistan started way before in 1979, I believe, under Carter. Jimmy Carter, and they ignored Cyrus Vance's prediction that would happen, and even before that, during Nixon, when Zedek Bhutto offered US to have the power of the military in Pakistan reduced in exchange for protection from the Afghanistan border and India. But Henry Kissinger did not go along with that. And at that time, Zedek Bhutto made a statement that what I am giving them now free, that rather, believe me, the US will be here in 30 years or 50 years at the cost of billions of dollars and thousands of American lives. So the history goes back. Someone from being that area, we always trying to figure out exactly what the intentions of US was, because they keep changing from democracy to terrorism. But I remember when I first came to this country in 1986, actually 87, I heard Colonel Oliver North giving testimony before the Congress in Iran-Contra affairs, and he mentioned in 87 that the most dangerous person for the United States at that time is Osama bin Laden. So that was 1987. So since then, we also are forgetting the intervention history with what is known as Charlie Wilson's War. So I think this is one thing that I understand from the American perspective is that we move on very quickly and we don't really try to understand. I appreciate this forum for dialogue and diplomacy. Thank you for your presentation and for the organizers. But I think for the dialogue and diplomacy to work, the core issue must be identified clearly. Exactly what it is that we want. We did hear American administration saying Pakistan to do more, but do more without specifying what. What more? So I just a question that I have, that would it be possible for America to sometimes take a step back and think through the historical context, and think about anthropology and ethnography also, and try to realize that power alone, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but sometimes it doesn't work. And that's, I think, the lesson from Afghanistan is, and will continue to move in that direction unless we really start to think about identifying a way of a dialogue in which we clearly able to ask the other party that this is exactly what we want. Thank you, sir.
Like to respond?
Yeah, well, I guess part of your question suggests a abiding interest in Afghanistan, sort of the country. And I would say, I mean, there is a way in which big events can have small causes. And if, bin Laden and Zawahiri had in 96, when they left, especially bin Laden, when bin Laden left Sudan in 96, if he'd gone to Yemen instead of Afghanistan, and then that's where he was living the next 5 years, and the hijackers were traced back to Yemen, some mountains in Yemen instead of Jalalabad, then I don't think the U.S. would have attacked Afghanistan. So there is a way, I mean, that is definitely a way in which 9/11 is part of why the war starts in Afghanistan. But then for your broader question, I mean, yeah, this is absolutely something that academics spend countless hours and pages debating, is what drives imperial powers, whether it's the British, the French, Russians, Americans. My own take is that there's a combination of economic interests, like sort of tangible interests of wanting to become wealthier, more powerful than other countries and stay way ahead of other countries. And then there's also a psychological dimension in which threats are magnified and people embrace arguments that are really not supported, perspectives that are not supported by the evidence. And I think when it comes to terrorism, that's certainly one of them. So, like I would say, when it comes to, I would say that when it comes to the United States, like getting into Panama or getting into Somalia or going into Afghanistan, these countries that are not great powers and are not really pivotal for great power competition, often the psychological element is a big, plays a big role. But again, I wouldn't have any disagreement with most of what you said in terms of going further back in history and being aware that the attacks on 9/11 had much deeper roots, not only in Afghanistan and South Asia, but also in terms of how the United States has been dealing with Egypt in the 1990s, dealing with Saudi Arabia and other countries.
I just want to make one interesting comment in terms of the introduction that I gave you, my introduction about my involvement with American Pakistan Institute for Justice and Democracy. But you have a tenure at the university, and because of this war for the last 15 years, according to the US government, I've been on the watch list and as a possible connection with terrorists. So I thought it would just be something interesting as a part of my introduction that I've been interviewed by Homeland Security and so on and so forth. So this is interesting that we are having a dialogue, so you can have a dialogue who is on the terrorist watch list for the Homeland. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, questions? Our next question.
I can. Hello. My mother keeps reminding me that my maternal grandparents came from Afghanistan, so I've always been interested in that region. Just listening to you is, it's like a traumatic roller coaster to go through the ups and downs that we all went through when we were living through that time period of the Afghan war. And it seems to be just a series of supremely unintended consequences, one thing after another, and you look back and you're like, Why didn't we figure out that this would happen and take a different direction? What I am interested in is now what we've done in Afghanistan, what has that spilled over for a long-term and short-term impact into Pakistan? And it looks like its trajectory of making a civilian democracy, a true civilian democracy, very difficult because of what we did as Americans in Afghanistan. I was hoping you could speak to that.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, I think the terrible loss of life in Pakistan over the past 20 years, especially, I mean, there were some stretches that were much deadlier and more unstable than others, but I think that's definitely a byproduct of the war and the way that Al-Qaeda came into Northwest Frontier Province and settled, and the way that some of the population of the tribal areas was mobilized to go fight in Afghanistan, and then the way that the United States, again, in basically dealing with what is an internal problem and treating it as an international terrorism problem, pressured the Pakistani government to take a very punitive approach towards fighting Al-Qaeda and any Pakistani groups that were supporting Al-Qaeda. So yeah, I think that was quite detrimental to stability in Pakistan. I suppose the only, to the extent that there's a positive dimension, I mean, there is some research that shows, and here I'm getting a little out of my depth, but that, I mean, the Pakistani government, when it comes to counterinsurgency, was more successful than the U.S. when it came to, inside Pakistan, it was more successful than the United States in counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, and part of that is because the tide of public opinion in Pakistan really turned against the TTP and Al-Qaeda after some of the worst terrorist attacks, like at the school, military school, if I'm recalling, so that really, they really lost a lot of legitimacy, and that allowed the Pakistani military, Pakistani government to sort of win the war of public opinion. But yeah, of course, you still have attacks going on in Pakistan today. It's not at the intensity that it was during that first decade of the war on terror. Oh, I think yes, I think there's a.
We have a
I think she was
question
waiting.
here, Iram, and then
Thank you.
Okay, after this, we will take 2 more questions because we have to be out of this room by 4:30, so we must also have light snacks and soft drinks up there, so we'll do 10 more minutes of discussion and then we can browse here. Okay.
No thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Charania and Dr. Lahari for providing this forum. And my question on the lighter side.
Your introduction first, sir.
Okay, my name is PJ Khan Sowathi and I'm from Ahmedabad. We have a medical college and hospital there. And because of intermarriages, I've been to Afghanistan many times, including Kandahar, Herat, Ghazni, Kabul, Mazar Sharif, almost from the places. So my question is very light. In your presentation, you mentioned 9/11, American being the superpower, so advanced in technology, and Al-Qaeda from like mountains area, and they succeeded. How? And the second question is about the Ahmedabad you mentioned, Osama bin Laden. You know, that was from Obama, it was a political move. Osama bin Laden was in a hospital in 2004 on dialysis, and he was seen by my father. And he was asked to continue, but he never came after 2004. And the third question is very light, like these, you mentioned these containers and all from the NATO supplies, they've been looted. And I've been many times in Peshawar, and for many years, people from Peshawar, they started using all the American stuff in their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And beside, you know, the military uniforms, the flags, the night vision goggles, and infrared and guns. I'm just wondering, how come? Because down here, we go and buy anything, we look at the ingredients, there's no pork inside. But whatever NATO supplied there, that was without these ingredients. And they were, I think they were so particular, they are supplying this eating stuff to that area, Muslim country, Pakistan and Afghanistan, they were so sure not to supply anything, and they got looted, and they were in the market, and all the people from Peshawar, they've been using that. So,
Yes.
I think we'll collect.
Something for the record, so you may write these things in your book.
If there is anything, you can answer.
No, but I can collect a few questions
Okay,
and do a final round.
Hi, I've been introduced. Iram Farooq was an ex-parliamentarian in Pakistan. Okay, I have a few questions. It's like people of Pakistan ask, and this is in my mind when I heard you speak about it. My roots also go back to Afghanistan. Never been to Afghanistan. My family came in the 18th century and so on. So I have interest as well. So my question is, when Osama bin Laden was taken, was killed and was taken, still the people think that he's alive or he was dead before this happened, because that is the reason nobody showed his face. There's no picture as yet. So my question is, how come your Americans think like that? They have seen brutal pictures of other leaders like Gaddafi, like Saddam going to the gallows and being hanged. So why not the enemy, which you call, the Americans call the worst enemy of American, has never been shown to the world? This is my question first. And the second is, after this war is finished, now Taliban's or Afghans are good, everything is going good with America. What about the Guantanamo Bay? There are still prisoners there. Why can't they leave them? Let them go back to their countries, wherever they belong to. What's stopping them?
Okay, right, so let me take
Jason doesn't
Guantanamo
represent
Bay.
the American
I
state.
do
Guantanamo
understand,
Bay,
but I'm just saying.
Bin Laden's corpse and 9/11. Okay,
It's the
so
thought.
yeah, Guantanamo Bay. I mean, Obama tried to shut it down, and basically it was like unanimous in Congress. No, we don't want them. I mean, it's preposterous. It's the executive branch. I mean, really, since at least the Clinton administration has strongly preferred to avoid conventional rule of law proceedings in courts. It really has a tough time prosecuting terrorism cases, and so that's why we still have detainees in Guantanamo, because they don't have the evidence to really to convict them. So yeah, it's an utter it's a travesty, and it's a constant
So wasn't that part of
a constant symbol of American
Wasn't that part of the
hypocrisy.
agreement between Taliban and the
Well,
Americans?
well, there were, actually during the Obama-Taliban negotiations, there were 5 Taliban released from Guantanamo.
Five.
Five. Those were the 5 that the Taliban wanted. Yeah, prisoner releases have been one of the things that the Taliban really insisted upon all along the way. And in fact, including with Ashraf Ghani, they wanted prisoners released before they would to talk to him, and he did release them. So with respect to the Bin Laden's body, yes, right. Why don't we have pictures the way we did for Uday and Qusay Hussein, or for Gaddafi? So the best reporting on this that I could recommend is a book by Matthew Cole. He's an investigative journalist. He works for The Intercept. His book came out last year, early 2022. It was overshadowed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's called Code Over Country, The Tragedy of SEAL Team 6. And he has covered very closely the history of the Navy SEALs. He's done tons of off-the-record interviews with former SEALs, including members of SEAL Team 6. And he goes into detail about these different operations, some of which have been made into movies where there's just so much myth and not much fact. And with respect to the Bin Laden raid, his reporting taught me a couple of things. One, that it was always intended as an assassination. It was never intended to be captured. That Bin Laden was shot when he was on the ground and no longer presenting a threat. That the 2 men who have bestsellers about how they killed Bin Laden or were in the raid were not the guy who killed Bin Laden. The guy who killed him remains anonymous. And but also, and Cole goes into a detail about some of the atrocities and savagery that the Navy SEALs committed in Afghanistan and other places. And he describes what happened to bin Laden's head and face. And I mean, to avoid, I won't get into grisly details, but basically, so disfigured that it would have absolutely shocked world opinion for that picture to be made public. That, and anyway, I trust Cole's reporting, but I recommend the book, Code Over Country. And with respect to, 9/11, how can the 19 hijackers pull it off? On that, I would recommend either the book or the Hulu series, The Looming Tower, by Larry Wright, an Austin native Larry Wright. And the fact is, the FBI and the CIA were not coordinating, that the 19 hijackers got extremely lucky, and that it is possible for individuals, sometimes badly educated, maybe without a lot of resources, to change the course of history. It is possible for huge events to have small causes. You know, that's why we have the JFK assassination, and then we have conspiracy theories about how there must have been so many people behind Lee Harvey Oswald. I think that, I can see through Larry Wright's reporting and the reporting that others have done that the 9/11 hijackers managed to evade detection. They did something that will never be done again, and that because it went beyond the realm of conventional imagination in the national security community, and they were able to play on the naivete of the passengers, that Mohammed Atta was able to say to everyone aboard that flight, just stay calm. If you stay calm, we're going to land the plane and make some political demands, the way it was like in the 1980s, like sort of 1980s style hijacking. No passengers will ever again believe hijackers when they just like, oh, just trust me, we're just going to land the plane if you stay calm. So that's my take on 9/11. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of reporting and speculation.
One last question.
Yes. Thank you for giving us the time here. My name is Amir Malik, and I have a really short question. Could have been war, would it be won? From the U.S. Could be the war have been won?
Could the war have been won?
Could the war have been won?
Yes.
Could the Americans have won the war?
I mean, my quick answer is no. I mean, it depends on what you mean by winning, but I would say in the conventional boundaries of let's say post-World War II great power behavior without dropping atomic weapons or just committing some type of mass genocide, no. If you were basically, if the country of Afghanistan is going to remain and the people of Afghanistan, tens of millions of people are going to continue to exist, there's no way that they would submit to a foreign occupation. I mean, this is like basically, since Algeria, since Dien Bien Phu, I mean, it's not going to happen anymore. So I'd say that.
You have to interact with that.
You have a question?
No, you.
Right. Okay, sorry. I'll make it short, sir. Make it short.
Thank you very much. Yes, much appreciated. Great talk. You mentioned, first my comment. My name is Khan Akmal. I retired at from Aramco, Saudi Arabia. My roots are also from Afghanistan, but I don't know. From 15th, 16th, 17th century. First a comment. The comment is, as a colonial power, the US has probably been the worst colonial power ever in history. No other colonial power has ever dismantled the security system of a country that it has taken over. Take the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, whoever took over the country or a nation, they kept their security systems in place, in fact, incorporating them into the government. The US has never learned that lesson. It doesn't matter whether it is in Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africa, wherever it has gone, it's destroyed the security system in place. Hence, the protracted wars. Hence the problems. Hence the destruction of society, civil society. Okay, that's one. The second one is what you alluded to earlier, which is nation building. The U.S. never really tried to do a nation building in Afghanistan. Had they done nation building, i.e. build schools, build hospitals, build the civil infrastructure, they probably would have been welcomed as liberators, and the nation would have been much better than it is today.
Thank you. It's a comment or a question? That's the question.
Yeah, so, I mean, on the nation building question, I mean, there were, I believe, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars spent.
Oh, money was spent for sure.
Money was spent. There were schools that were built, the shoddy construction. There was one highway that was built at crazy expense because there was no local like concrete manufacturing capacity, so they were flying it in from, I think, Uzbekistan or something, like strip by strip of the highway. Yeah, I mean, kind of in the spirit of your question, someone that I spoke with in Islamabad, a former ambassador, said they should have been dropping cows instead of bombs. They should have been like working to whatever Afghans needed. They should have been addressing that instead of using so much force. And then with respect to dismantling the security apparatus, right? Well, you've got that's your initial juncture and your choice. Do you leave in place the security apparatus and let it continue to function, which is the more indirect rule kind of approach that allows for more stability, or not? In the post 9/11 wars, like whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, you have basically said from the get-go, the existing state is the problem. So we're going to raise the state. We're going to get rid of the Ba'ath Party. We're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein's security forces. I mean, and then we've got to think counterfactually. Well, if you hadn't, you would have had, a lot of Shia in Iraq would have been upset if the Ba'ath had been kept around. So it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think the overall lesson is, yeah, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, when you get rid of the state, you thrust these countries from situations of very odious, in some cases authoritarian regimes, into civil wars, which can often be just as bad, if not worse.
Well, without going too far into it,
Can
the
we
roots
stop? Can we just
the roots
continue
of
the
ISIS,
discussion?
just have it.
Okay.
The roots of ISIS are the dismantled security system of Iraq. That's the roots of ISIS.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
I'll end at that.
I agree with it.
Okay. Well, before we get to thank you and we move on to have our short snacks, we have 30 more minutes in this room, just to let you know. Just a short comment that I would like to make. Dr. Zaid Imran actually made a comment that he first heard of Osama bin Laden in 1989, I believe, 87, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, I first heard of Osama bin Laden in 1989 when he financed $10 million for a vote of no confidence against the then democratically elected first female Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto. It's a matter of record. So you should note that also in your book. And it's so unfortunate that 33 years onwards in history, her son is now working as a foreign minister to the same man who received $10 million from Osama bin Laden. That's my comment.
This is reality.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.